Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kate Mosse, and this is the 14th of our pre-performance talks. We are nearly there. Some of you, I think I've seen... Where's the lady with all the badges who's been to everything? There she is. This lady has been to every single one, so I think she deserves a round of applause before we start, actually. The aim of the pre-performance talks, as indeed the post-performance talks, is to just give a sense from the personal people who know a play and a production best, and it's part of celebrating the 50th anniversary of our wonderful CFT. Today I am honoured, indeed, as well as thrilled, to be able to interview Dame Janet Suzman, who is directing Antony and Cleopatra, and particularly because this is the most beautiful... Thank you. Are they your cast?
I don't think so. I can't see.
Are you a member of the cast? No. She looks like she'd like to be there. You look like an actress.
I think there is one there.
Good, excellent. And this is on this wonderful set. We've only got 45 minutes because this was an extra thing sneaked into the brochure. So you will forgive us if we rattle through a little bit. Janet Suzman, as I'm sure you all know from your programme, was born in Johannesburg and came to London in 1959, studied at LAMDA. She debuted in Billy Liar in 1962 at the Tower Theatre in Ipswich, but then joined the RSC Company in 1963, and for the next decade played all the great Shakespeare women, didn't you? You played Portia, Ophelia, Kate from Taming of the Shrew, Beatrice, Lavinia, and of course in 1973, Cleopatra herself. Now, you all know how much I hate Wikipedia and cheating in research, but I couldn't resist taking this off. I don't know if you've ever seen what they say about your Cleopatra on Wikipedia.
No, I haven't been near it.
Well, I mean, Wikipedia is normally very unimaginative and not very elegant, but they describe you on Wikipedia, your Cleopatra, as magisterial, ardent, and seductive. And I thought that was rather wonderful. And then, of course, many, many other wonderful roles in all the great plays, modern as well as the classics. Of course, then, Janet is also known as a director, directing very importantly in Johannesburg the production of Othello in 1987. And since then has been that rare creature, if I might say, someone who is as celebrated as a director and indeed as a writer as she is as an actress. But of course, here, you are directing Antony and Cleopatra. You've played Cleopatra both on stage and on film, and you've directed Cleopatra before. Now, you probably know this play better than anybody. Do you think that's fair to say?
It's accurate.
It's accurate. Good.
I do. I know it inside out. You can't not, I suppose. I'm a bit like... I once sat with Daniel Barenboim studying a score on an aeroplane. He was about to conduct something magnificent in New York. And I could see him hearing the tune of this, I think it was Mahler, in his head as we flew across the Atlantic. And in 5 hours, he knew it. Well, I don't have an eidetic memory as he does, but the music of this great symphony is absolutely inside here. And sometimes I wish I were a conductor, because you can legitimately bring out the music that you're hearing inside and make those musicians play it. But it's a fascinating thing to know something so well and then see others interpreting it. It's wonderful.
Did you want to come back to it? Because you did a production with, indeed, Kim Cattrall at the Liverpool Playhouse a couple of years ago. Did you feel here that you wanted to try it again in a different way? Did you want to just do it again because it had been so extraordinary? Explain to everybody what made you want to come back to it at this stage.
It was a voyage that had its own sort of strange impetus, really. From Liverpool, it was sort of good enough to go somewhere, but nobody had quite enough money at the time.
Right.
It's always money.
Always money.
Yes. And so this production seemed to have a sort of meandering voyage and landed up here in this harbour. That meant that it had a completely different dispensation, this great thrust stage here. So from Liverpool Playhouse, which is rather intimate, really, a sort of Masham house, and end on, which meant that the play was more concentrated visually, but less, it didn't sit quite as mightily as it does here. And the designer, Peter Mackintosh, who's, I think, done the best Elizabethan stage set that I can think of. You know, Shakespeare's stage would have had an upper stage. And obviously, it means that you can knit scenes together very well. One scene coming on, another scene going off, with this upper stage and this lower stage. There, the bridge was straight across because it was an end-on theatre. Now we've curved it so it thrusts it more towards you lot. And this great shining orb of an Egyptian mighty floor, you know, you can really see and stuff like that. And it meant that the muscularity of the play changed a lot. Whereas you can disappear people like that into wings on an end-on theatre. Here they have to come on and disappear in other ways. And these two things, horribly called vomitorium, sorry about that. Latin sometimes is horrid. Those are the places that makes the play flow.
Do you think that the sheer scope of the stage here therefore means that the underlying sense that it's not simply a love story, it is a story of politics, of two massive nations?
Do you know, Kate, I don't know where, I do know where. Of course I know where. The idea that Antony Cleopatra is the greatest love story in the world is all Hollywood's fault, really. It's all Elizabeth and Richard having that tempestuous affair when that film was made. And it's exactly what Octavius Caesar wanted. Octavius Caesar wanted us to believe that really all Cleopatra was interested in was Antony. But she was interested in lots of other things too, because she was the Queen of Egypt. And she has such a fascinating history. And of course, archaeology being much more scientific now, we know more about the period certainly than Shakespeare did, who relied on Plutarch. For instance, that Bard's speech of Enobarbus is lifted almost word for word from North's Plutarch. But the more you look at the play, and this was in a little kernel, a little embryo of thought that Trevor Nunn and I had when we first looked at the play, was her sort of veiledness, her cryptic nature in the play. And what began to emerge as I thought more deeply about it when I came to it yet again, although we did absolutely start working on that idea then, was to develop what is there incipiently in the play, which is that the boot is on the other foot. For a change, it's the man who's obsessively in love. And again, you find these wrenching lines from Antony about trying to get off his drug, trying to go cold turkey. And he can't do it.
So the obsession is
the obsession
is
the man's. Yeah. But it seems not the woman's. She has this life-enhancing desire not to die. And his commitment when he learns that she is falsely dead is total. He doesn't hesitate a second before he says, unarm Eros, the long day's task is done, and we offer the dark. She, on the other hand, is determined to find these meandering ways towards a possible other life, not only for herself, of course, but for her children and the succession in Egypt. So now you see a politically aware operator, a queen, at work, and also a wonderfully complex, selfish, fascinating person trying to stay alive. And I just love the contrast of those two things. Normally, the sort of love-obsessed Phaedra, if you like.
Yes, I like the Phaedra
idea. It's a good idea, isn't it? I consider Antony to be much more of a Phaedra than Cleopatra in this play. And it's the imbalance and the difference between them that I find really fascinating. And
there was a point, there is a wonderful book, and you are all, I'm afraid, not allowed to leave the theatre until you have bought one, and Janet will be signing them afterwards, called Not Hamlet, which is an utter gem. And in this essay on Cleopatra in here, one of the things that I thought was absolutely wonderful was the idea that all the time Cleopatra talks with almost regret about the man he was. So there is that sort of loss, the autumn sense of who
Not
he
only
was.
Cleopatra,
Wonderful.
It starts at the beginning of the play. Every character who knew Antony once, Caesar, Philo, who begins the play, Enobarbus, even a common soldier who said, "'Tis the god Hercules whom Antony loved, now leaves him." The idea of the split Antony, the Antony who once was the great warrior and who now is something else. And all through Antony's lines, there's this idea of this diminished second Antony. So it's not just Cleopatra. She hardly talks about that, although it rushes up in memory sometime, and it certainly rushes up in her dream at the end. She dreams, her last dream, of a lost time, a lost love, is the Antony who once was, dropping nations from his pockets. And so that is a theme throughout the play. It's a kind of leitmotif in everybody speaking about the once Antony, the quondam Antony.
And the other thing that I was really struck by, because it sounds ridiculous, but the last time I saw Antony and Cleopatra was here in 1969, when I was not really old enough to understand it, with John Clements and Margaret Leighton. I didn't know them at the time. But it felt a completely different play. Once I had read this, that sense of Cleopatra being this extraordinary, clever, bright, political, and not the sort of manipulative, sometimes rather fey woman that is presented sometimes in the play, that she's just manipulating him all the time.
No, I think she's misread a great deal. That's mainly by, if anybody here belongs to it, forgive me, in the groves of academe, which is largely male, the view of reading the text of Cleopatra is obviously limited by their gender. Sorry to sound like this. But the fact remains that she's not just manipulative at all. She's acting out of hurt and pain in order, in the first few scenes of the play, to get Antony to come clean about his relationship with his wife. There's no woman on earth who likes a wife there who seems to have the ultimate power because it's legitimate. And even being the mistress doesn't give her legitimacy, and that rankles. And so, of course, she behaves badly. Who wouldn't?
So when you're, obviously, having played Cleopatra, and so famously so, probably it is you and Elizabeth Taylor. These are the two Cleopatras in most people's... I'm sorry to put you in the same sentence. I don't know, I don't think that's so bad, frankly. But so having played a role, as the director, do you try to strip away the person you were when you were the actor on the stage? Or do you actually just simply come round here and go and stand there and look in instead? How do you start to reinterpret a text when you know it so well from the stage?
You look at the text. The text, the text, and the text. I'm an absolute Puritan about that. That's how I was brought up. My first dipping my toe into the business of this Shakespearean stuff was with Peter Hall and John Barton and Peter Brook and Peter Wood and all that crowd, what you might call the Cambridge School. And that came straight out of Daly Rylands and F.R. Leavis, actually, who were pragmatists about text. They really were. What lies inside there that gives you the clues about what the character's doing and feeling? There's a famous story of Dustin Hoffman, I think, who came over to do Merchant of Venice with Peter Hall. And he was all gung-ho about it and said, "Peter, can we do some improvisations about this?" And Peter said, "Yes, have a go." And apparently he tried, to get near to the Shylock he envisaged in his head. And then he was purported, I don't know if it's apocryphal, he phoned up Peter Hall at about 2 o'clock in the morning and said, "Peter, you can't improvise this shit." So he understood what we understand. You can't. Suck it out of your thumb. You only got the text. So being a pragmatist myself, I go only to the text to tell me what is going on with every single character. So, in fact, I don't have the problem of thinking about how it once was. I got it from the same source as my actors are getting it from. It's no different. The words are the same. So the conclusions must be similar. too.
Yes.
Differences of interpretation because everybody's different, but what they're actually up to is what you deduce from what is told you.
But there is also a sense of interpretation being about plausibility, about Cleopatra in particular, being a real, living, breathing, sometimes contradictory person. And that's why it's such an extraordinary role, isn't it? That she's not just two-dimensional.
No character of Shakespeare is. He was much too good a playwright to do that. Even the merest soldier he gives a character to. There's always something that makes it three-dimensional. And she's multi-dimensional. Of course she is. There are so many facets to her. So when you get a speech of Enobarbus describing the variety that is on offer in this, it seems to me superhuman in some ways, because all of us have many sides to us. There's a private and a public, but there's also unadmitted sides. Of course, in drama, everything must be out there. And it seems to me that Shakespeare must have understood somebody and their psychologies very well. And I think one of the problems of being a Shakespearean is we are post-Freudians. So we're sometimes lumbered with very complex motives, which Shakespeare wouldn't have had. He would have known instinctively. And I know there's a bunch of psychoanalysts in Hampstead who meet on the third Sunday of every month to analyse the motives of Shakespeare's characters, because they're always so true and human and believable. And I remember attending one of those sessions on Iago, a terribly complex creature. So it still astonishes us that his instinct was to so get to the heart of humanity that it's believable in pre-Freudian terms. But I also remember trying very hard to be Lady Anne to Ian Holmes' Richard III once at Stratford. And we were rehearsing over the corpse of my husband that he'd killed and several others of my family as Lady Anne. And she has to fall in love with this monster creature, who's charming beyond speech. And at one point I said to Peter out there in the auditorium, and I said, how? It's not possible. How can this woman fall in love with this terrible creature? And he said, just do it. And I thought, he's so right. Sometimes you have to be really simple.
Yes, and just
hold your nose and take the plunge and do it in Shakespeare. Yeah, just dive in.
But it is a mighty, mighty play. There are, I think, you write in the book, more scenes than Hamlet, 37 characters. How do you translate that to, one, a modern audience who possibly can't listen as well as the original audiences might have done, and also to make it the narrative clear, if you like, all the way through?
Yes. Well,
yes.
Get the blue pencil out. Cut.
So do you cut? Do you feel that
I have cut savagely. And if there are any purists here, go home now. But the thing is to make the story clear. Yeah. It's so episodic. It's actually a movie. You really just need, a helicopter shot from to Alexandria and back to Rome, Misenum, Crete, all over the place.
No words at all in that case.
No, you just need a camera. So you've got to do it with words. Yeah. And I think the big trouble is there are too many words in Shakespeare for our ears now. So there have been a lot of internal cuts, and I've excised some scenes. But what I think I've done is give everybody... there were 39 characters to begin with. There are now 20. So I've actually, for instance, the man who opens the play with a mighty speech called Philo doesn't appear later in the play at all. But he now goes all the way through as a captain of Antony's who eventually defects, steals the sword with which Antony kills himself and goes over to Caesar at the end. And the play is full of defections from Antony, as if slowly bits of his limbs are dropping off and he's left quite alone with his own failures at the end. There are so many defections in the play. Anyway, I've given all those people a story, and therefore cut out many extra Decretuses and creatures who were in and out of the play. So I've streamlined it, and I've economized, and I hope, made the story clear. It's still a complex one.
Yes, and does it feel, you know, because there's always a great debate about whether one should or shouldn't cut. But does that actually, for you, is that a sign of how great Shakespeare actually is, that a play can be cut?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He can suffer any abuse. He really can. Yeah. He's so mighty and elastic and bigger than anything that one would ever come across. So, of course he can. But I think he would be happy with some clarity. And there's so many references that we, as a modern order, we don't know the words mean this or the words mean. For instance, a simple one, let those who have revolted in the van. So you think van is vanguard, of course. But Shakespeare shortens it to van, and you think nowadays people are going to think of white van men.
Ford Transits.
Yeah, yeah. They're not going to think of the front. So I've changed it to the front. As long as it's got the right amount of feet to complete an iambic line or not ruin it.
Yes.
I'm happy to change a word that has gone out of our vocabulary because, I mean, English is such a galloping language, it keeps on moving.
And it's also, I mean, even on the, you know, I'm not a playwright quite yet, but as a novelist...
I hope you will be.
I will, well, we
yes.
might do. But it's that sense that sometimes if you use the wrong word that doesn't any longer speak, then it snags the reader's attention or the audience's ear.
Yes, it does.
And it actually disables the story. It doesn't
I think so. It makes people hang up on a word and think, what does it mean, what does it mean? And then you've gone on already. So I'd rather not do that. But what I do like is exercising an audience's imagination. I think that's one of the grand experiences of Shakespeare, is that you hear imagery that you really don't come across at all in ordinary life anymore. And it just stirs up that old brain a bit and that imagination. And it's the same with the actors. But it's odd how people get used to things so quickly. I mean, in one speech, you will find 5 words that you haven't heard for 10 years, or if ever. Yeah. And you want the actor to be responding freshly to it, and indeed, because of that, the audience. But we have a very, very compressed and limited vocabulary on the whole. Yes. And I think the enlargement into Shakespeare is thrilling, at least I find.
Yes, and in fact, looking at it again before coming here, it sounds ridiculous, and I know all of you will feel the same if you haven't been in, but actually I just can't wait till tomorrow night when I'm going to see it. You know, you just think, God, to hear these words, not just to read them.
Yeah, it's a wonderful
I mean, it's a different experience. Now, we haven't got as much time as, obviously, because as you guys all know, I could actually sit here for about 5 hours, but obviously there's a show to go on. But I do just want to move on a little bit from Antony and Cleopatra, just the one play, but into the general sense of Shakespeare and women and actors. Because when I was reading Not Hamlet, there's product placement here, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're impressed, you were talking about the fact that it wasn't quite sure if it had ever been performed. It must have been performed, but there was no public record of...
There's none at all. It might have been in the Blackfriars, for all we know. They'd moved out of the Globe into that interior theatre across the Thames. This was written in 1606. And there is no record of performance, but I don't believe it. It was done somewhere.
No, because it feels performed. I mean, you can tell a play that's never been done, can't you?
I think so. Yeah. It doesn't feel dusty.
It doesn't, and one of the things that's very interesting for the audience here, who went to Theatre in the Fly, I'm sure, did any of you see Playhouse Creatures? Yes. So the second of the plays in the pop-up theatre, which is sadly popping down as we speak, was a play by April de Angelis about supposedly the first female actors on the stage. And of course it was restoration, and Nell Gwynn was in, as we were saying, bright as a button.
Yes.
But you were making the point about a character as wonderfully complex, certainly as Cleopatra and actually other Shakespearean characters, that you didn't entirely buy the idea that they were all little boys who hadn't got yet beards.
Not only not entirely buy, reject. Out of hand, yes.
And in your version of Antony and Cleopatra, you've just passed this me, I hadn't seen it, a particular academic who has just come up with a particular line.
No, he was a traveller.
He was a traveller, was he?
Yes.
Oh, a famous traveller. Yes, indeed, he was a famous traveller. And it said that I have heard that it hath been sometimes used in London to see a woman act, and that's 1608.
Yes.
So you were right.
I'm right.
Which is always good, I feel.
I'm right. I have this feeling that all kinds of secret and weird things went on under the eye of the Puritan police, who were obviously... Women were allowed to act in Italy, Spain, certainly France later, certainly in the 17th century, we know that for sure. But way back when, even in the mystery plays, there were women's involvements in things in medieval theatre. I don't see women just disappearing off the map in Elizabethan and Jacobean time. I just don't see it. There just had to be immense secrecy and cunning. Tom Stoppard is no fool, so he wrote Shakespeare in Love, hitting the button about, some secret little performance of a girl coming in to play Viola. I can see without any problem boys playing the young girls in Shakespeare. But what happens to the older women and the middle-aged women and the interesting, feisty women like Emilia and Paulina and then Volumnia and certainly Cleopatra, and on it goes. Those aren't women. Those are grown men, actors, because you will have noticed that Englishmen are absolutely fabulous at playing women.
It's the public school system, I've been told. Sorry, those of you
Could be that, could be that. But time and again, not just pantomime dames, certainly your stand-up comics, they'll do the burlesque side of things. But men are just really, really good. I think it's hormones or genes or something. They're really good at playing women. They pick it up. They understand it. And certainly the best tragic, great performance I've ever seen was a kabuki actor playing the Medea in a production by Ninagawa. He was, a lot of his work was here, in fact, Michael, yes, at the Barbican and in the World Theatre Seasons. And Ninagawa's production of the Medea, which was with a Japanese company, had a kabuki actor playing Medea, the most feline, dangerous, languorous, strange and interesting performance I've ever seen. And that was a man who didn't add anything, didn't need to. His body just responded to being female in a kind of sheath dress. He was remarkable. And then, of course, men have a much greater range of voice. They go from mid-tenor to light tenor, and, you know, they can sing, of course, into contralto and alto, even soprano roles, whereas women are lumbered with not being able to lower their voices, and they don't have the range. They don't have the vocal range that men can have. So with every possible way, I think men have a perfectly adequate armoury in order to play women. And of course, you can always add, but you can't subtract. You know what I mean? So I think men probably played a lot of the parts, but I'm quite convinced that there was some dark lady somewhere who allowed him to... You know, composers always... Mozart and Schumann and Schubert, they always wrote for their soloists. They wrote difficult arias and difficult pieces of instrumental music for the people who could play them, their soloists. So why not, you know, playwrights? You write if you have a muse, if you're inspired. And I see some kind of inspiration in this extraordinary creature that Shakespeare had up his sleeve somewhere, I'm sure. We will find her.
We will find her.
Yes.
In an interview you did, I think it was in The Guardian last year, I think you described yourself as a militant liberal. And I thought that was a fabulous phrase. And I wondered if you felt over your time on you know, both sides of our non-existent curtain, do you think that the way that politics and society and cultural norms and expectations change over time. Do they change how a play can be heard or seen in ways that are unexpected? Or do you always sort of know who your audience is and what you're going to get? I mean, I suppose particularly I'm thinking the work you do here and the work you do in South Africa, there is presumably a different expectation in terms of cultural knowledge. Or is there not? Is it the same?
I think a play works when it plugs into something we all know somehow, and that to which we can respond. I think it's Michael Pennington, who's my wonderful Antony, who coined this phrase once, and I think it strikes the bell, that Shakespeare's plays, like iron filings to a magnet, seem to attract every crisis that is in the air. And that's why we keep doing them. Yeah. They keep on responding to a political status quo of some kind. And that's why I did Othello in apartheid South Africa, because that's the story of a black man humiliated by a white thug. And that seemed to me the most perfect metaphor for apartheid that I could think of. And that's the way that a Johannesburg audience viewed that play. And for once, unlike agitprop and political theatre, there was no jargon. Shakespeare doesn't talk down to anybody. And that's what's flattering about it. You rise up to it. And that's always flattering for an audience, I think, and correct, that you should rise to the occasion. And my sense of politics has always been vivid because of that. I can't help it. It was drip-fed into us, having a South African childhood, that you are aware of other things all the time. And you're certainly aware of dangers. And maybe that's another thing I respond to in Shakespeare, is that he lived in dangerous times. And I feel that most of his plays are sort of the black piste on a skiing mountain. You know, there are sharp drops there into danger. And I do respond to that. I don't really go for cosy plays too much. But I think that politics, you can't say nothing is political, because everything is. Everything is. And I think the theatre has to be a kind of hot point in a theatre. It can't, in a town, really. I think it should be a place where you go to respond to things that you perhaps have been concerned with or thought about. Certainly in politically embattled countries, an audience goes to the theatre to be at one with the rest who are going for the same reason. You know, it's a place where you can let off steam, in a way, which is why I think, in a way, theatre is much more exciting in politically vexed countries, because it seems to dare more.
I was going to say, do you think British theatre is meeting that challenge? Do you think we're in a golden age, a China age, whatever the opposite is?
I don't know what we're in, but it's an age where we are visually very voracious. We want very exciting sets and lighting and glamorous people, and I'm not sure that always serves the content of a play quite wonderfully. I still yearn for a bit of maverickness. I like a little bit something outside the, the West End box, really. I think going to see prettiness and glamour on the stage is not always the satisfying thing to see. You want to be disturbed a bit and worried a bit and fascinated and, but I think we're in an absolutely wonderful age of presentation and a lot of the time of acting. There are wonderful actors around. There really, really are.
And playwrights? Do you think there's enough new good work?
Well, England, I must say Britain.
It's all right, we're in Sussex. You're safe with England.
I'm safe with England. England produces more playwrights per acre, I think, than any country in the world. No, it's wonderful. Yeah. It is. But I think there are more women coming up now. You probably will lead them. But I think, the fact that that young girl wrote Enron.
Yeah, Lucy Prebble.
Lucy Prebble, exactly, about that, that market crisis.
And what is wonderful is it opened here. It was a Chichester thing. And for the very first performance, everybody had heard as a play about collapse at the stock exchange, everyone would go, great, that sounds fantastic.
Yes, I can't
so it was
resist it.
completely empty. There was just most of the youth theatre on one side, and a few of us had all been strong-armed in. And everybody came out like, oh, my God, what have we just seen?
Yes.
And then, of course, you couldn't get a ticket for love or money. But that was the joy of it.
But that's very exciting.
It
touched a nerve, and it was about what people are concerned with. Yeah. That's what it should be, really.
Yeah.
You don't want tea trays really anymore.
No. And I think one of the other things that is very interesting about a place like Chichester, obviously I am a Chichesterian, so I feel strongly about this theatre, but I also think you see it on the South Bank of the National Theatre, is the sense of audiences that know their theatre.
Yes.
It's not just about going because they've heard War Horse is fun. They watch a whole festival of theatre. So try different sorts of things. So they come in ready to learn. You know, sounds pompous, but you know what I mean.
You know, when you think about it, the one industry in the world that has gone on uninterrupted for 500 years is the theatre in this country. We've lost the steel industry, the car industry, I don't know what other industries we've lost. But on it goes from 1550 onwards, you know, with a few Puritan dips and things like that. But on the whole, it's probably central to both the language, the thinking, and the drama of England. I mean, you just look at the Jubilee celebrations, and there's Shakespeare at it.
Absolutely. You've got to have a use for that bard somehow.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
Obviously, you know, you were here in 1999 as an actress in Retreat from Moscow with lovely Ted Hardwick and
he's a sweet man.
Bill Nicholson's play. And now you're here directing. When you're directing, do you miss acting? And when you're acting, do you miss directing? Or do you just feel you are that woman who has it all?
No, you don't feel... You just put on that hat.
But do you need a fix of both, and writing as well, to feel that you're...
You know, a long time ago, I realised that a career for a woman in the theatre is a bit narrow. And I thought, I don't want to be gasping for a part when I'm over the hill, which I am. And so I started diversifying a lot because I don't find theatre absolutely all engrossing. I need other things as well, like I am interested in lots of things, and writing certainly interests me, and directing started to interest me. And so I suppose it wasn't that intentional, but I knew there was a limited life, alas, for women's parts, because I was part of, I suppose I'm part of women's lib, actually, aren't I? We all are. But,
well, we all are,
so
because
it
we're
wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
It's still not there. But it's happening, you know, it's moving along. And I thought, diversify, you know, have other irons in the fire. But I happen to be interested in them. So it wasn't so planned. It was a sort of instinctive move not to be stranded too much, I suppose.
So what after this?
Oh, well...
No, I didn't mean literally, because you're going to be signing books in a moment, but I mean beyond Antony Cleopatra.
Beyond. Well, I did a play in South Africa last year. It's got a funny, sad history, which is I did a production of Hamlet in Cape Town in 2006, and we had been invited to come and open the Royal Shakespeare Company's Complete Works Festival. In 2006, they did every single word that Shakespeare wrote from beginning to end. And they asked us, very kindly, to come with our production to the Swan. And on Easter weekend, 4 days before we were due to fly to Stratford, with a very young company in Cape Town, except for the great John Carney as Claudius, my Rosencrantz was murdered, because that sort of thing happens in South Africa. And this young boy, I last saw him after a wonderful matinee, and those kids were going to be off Saturday night, Sunday, Monday, come back Thursday, fly to England. They were so excited it wasn't true. And he never turned up for breakfast with his mother on the Sunday. And they found his body on Monday morning, and he'd been shot through the head, and I don't want to go there. However, a play evolved out of that incident, which I did last year in Cape Town. A beautiful play. And I played it with a young man from the townships of Cape Town who'd never been on the stage before in his life, and he was absolutely gorgeous. And now it looks like it's coming to the Edinburgh Festival next year.
Oh,
so that's the next thing to try and, make happen. You never know if it will or won't. So that's something I'm keen on because it's beautifully written. And I'm also going to write a book now. It's funny, when you start a subject, all sorts of things come flying at you. And I found a stray academic. And he and I want to write a book together about... There probably are academics in the audience, and you won't be able to correct me, because none of us know the subject yet. Which is that it's thought that women started acting on the stage openly in England at about 1660 Restoration,
yes.
right?
Yes.
But there are lurking reports, like this Thomas Coriat, 1608, of women long before, which will start giving some base to my feeling that there were all sorts of secrecies in 1606, which we don't know about. And he and I are going to write a book together and pull together all the various shreds of evidence which are floating around in various dusty shelves at the moment. And I'm kind of looking forward to that, because I've never written... It'll be a semi-academic. He'll be the academic side, and I'll be something else, I don't know what. But so that's the thing to do. I think it'll be quite exciting.
Well, I think one of the things is that, we've talked a little bit, we haven't got enough time to talk properly about all these different sorts of areas, but you have made an enormous contribution to women in theatre and indeed film in many, many ways. And my sneaky little tiny claim to fame is that Janet is actually in the adaptation of one of my books, which is How We First Met.
Labyrinth.
And once I knew that, it was fine. I didn't care who else was cast, I'm afraid to say. But I think it's very important to say that we've got to draw to an end, that Janet has very kindly agreed to sign copies of not Hamlet. And for all of you who are theatre lovers, because I know most of you from all these talks, it's not just the amazing chapter on Cleopatra, but it's the links that are made. The idea, for example, that Hedda Gabler and Cleopatra are both women who choose death over a compromised life. God, I wish I'd written that phrase. It's just brilliant. And also, we've got a copy of this Antony Cleopatra. So Janet is going to sign in a moment. It just remains for me, therefore, to finish from the stage, to say that the afterwards chat is on Tuesday the 18th. And some of the members of the cast of Antony Cleopatra, I mean, it is such an extraordinary, not just the pairing at the top, as it were, but the entire cast. And I know many of you will be coming in before that and will be coming in subsequently. But don't forget, you can always come just on Tuesday with your normal ticket and just come in afterwards, just in the auditorium after the show has come down. And I suppose this is the end of the pre-show talks that I've been doing. Most of you have come to many of them. It's one of the reasons that we love Chichester so much. On the 29th of September, this theatre, this wonderful old main house will close, and it will be even more wonderful when it reopens in 2014, and we will all enjoy our time in the big top, whatever we're calling it, pavilion, I think, up the park. But it was just one of those wonderful things I noticed that, of course, in 1962, the 3rd of July, 1962, Sir Laurence Olivier directed the first play and was the person who opened this theatre. And I think it's very appropriate. Vanya was the 3rd, and we had The Broken Heart, and the other one. Thank you. God, I've forgotten everything I wrote back in April. Too many books in between. But it's this lovely idea, and particularly because we've been talking about women in theatre and how things are changing, that a Sir opened the theatre and a Dame is going to shut it. Ladies and gentlemen, Dame Janet Suzman.